Following program is for information purposes only. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of 570 News, its management, or Rogers Communications.
You've got questions. We've got answers. Welcome to Ask the Experts on 570 News. Advice and tips from the people who really know. Now here's your host, Dave Callender.
And welcome into another edition of Ask the Experts. I am Dave Callender, and on the show today, joining me once again, we're pleased to welcome back to the show Ian Martin of Hoyes, Michalos and Associates. Hoyes, Michalos and Associates is a firm of trustees in bankruptcy. They started in Kitchener, Cambridge, and Guelph back in 1999. And they've now grown to more than 20 offices throughout southern Ontario. Ian works in the Kitchener office, which, oddly enough, is just up the street, a few blocks up.
Short drive, Dave.
It is. And Ian's also a chartered accountant and a licensed trustee in bankruptcy. Today we're going to talk to Ian about why you want a trustee on your side, why a trustee is the expert you should talk to about getting your debts under control. So thanks so much for being on the show again.
Well, thank you for having me, Dave. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
And we want to say off the top of the show that if you want to get things rolling right away, you can always call Hoyes Michalos at 310-PLAN. I'm sure we'll talk about why that number is important, why the word plan is a good word. You can also go online while you listen to the show at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And throughout the hour, if you've got questions for us, you can call us right here in the studio. We'll answer them live on the air at 519-570-2545, out of town 1-800-570-5715, or star 570, hands-free on your cell phone. We also want to mention that we're podcasting this today on 570news.com. If you want to see our pretty faces, you can log on there and watch the show live. So, every day you get to hear the word bankruptcy. And that is a big, scary word for the average person. As a bankruptcy trustee, do you find that people are reluctant to talk to you about their problems?
The simple answer to that is yes, most definitely, Dave. And there's at least two aspects of it. Number one, despite this age of openness and transparency where people will seem to put anything on, Twitter or Facebook or whatever, money problems continue to be a bit of a taboo subject. It's not something people want to talk to their friends about or their family, and definitely not to a stranger. When you add in that stranger is associated with the word bankruptcy, which I understand is a scary word for people, it does add another layer of anxiety. So to be clear, I'm not here today to promote the concept of bankruptcy. My objective for today is really just to explain what my role is as a professional, a financial professional, in helping people find a resolution to their debt problems. And in a nutshell, what I do is I talk to people, and I understand the situation, and I review their options with them. And that definitely includes bankruptcy. Sometimes it means bankruptcy, but most times it means that there's a different option that makes more sense to them. At the start of the show, you alluded to our phone number, 310-PLAN. And that's really what it's about. If you're sitting around and you're struggling with your debts, you're not sure what to do, if you need some help, we're here to help you make a plan to deal with the situation.
Now, you still have this title, though, trustee in bankruptcy. What does it actually mean to be a trustee in bankruptcy?
Yeah, I guess along with the idea of bankruptcy, the word trustee, it's something that can be used in common language, but within the context of what I do, a bankruptcy trustee is a regulated profession. A person who has a trustee's license for the government has, basically they have the authority by law to provide various services that by law have specifications about who can provide those services, and oftentimes a lot of regulation about what those services even mean. The most common example is bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is it's governed by I was distracted there. It's governed by the provisions of the Canadian Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. But the BIA, the Bankruptcy Act, it provides for other options as well, forms of restructuring that are commonly referred to as proposals. The most common example for an individual is a consumer proposal. I guess a different aspect of what you've asked is that the license that I have as a trustee, it is issued by the government. It's an area called the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. It's interesting that it's the same licensing process for both people who deal with individuals as well as large corporations. My company, Hoyes Michalos and Associates, we are solely focused on helping individuals. We have a network of offices throughout southwestern Ontario, where we are one of the largest personal insolvency firms in the area. And I think the only other thing that I would add to that is really that even though it's not a requirement per se, Most trustees have accounting designations, and what that means is they bring to the table years of experience in areas like accounting and tax. I'm a chartered accountant, for example, so prior to embarking on my trustee's license 5 years ago, I had 10 years of experience in other financial-related areas, which served me very well in terms of helping people sort through their money problems.
Now, mainly your job is, you said, to help people review their options. How do you actually go about doing that?
Well, I guess a typical day for me is spent communicating rather with people in a variety of ways. I have meetings with people where we go over things in detail. I spend a lot of time on the phone when people are initially calling us with questions about their situation, and also a lot of people contact us by email. And obviously people are reaching out to us when they're in a time of need. They're facing some financial uncertainty, and they're looking for a professional, an expert to help them, guide them through the area. So my job is, there's a couple aspects of it. I need to understand the numbers of it. I need to understand the details about who they owe money to and what kind of stuff they own and income and stuff like that. But I also have to listen to them. I need to understand what their concerns are and what their fears are, and to help them a little bit about what their goals are for the future as well, so that I can help them achieve those goals.
In what way does a trustee differ than other debt management services?
But I find that that's a really interesting question, and honestly, we could probably talk about that for the balance of our hour, Dave. Over the last several years, there is really, for a variety of reasons, a shocking number of people who find themselves in financial difficulty. And as people go through that process of trying to find somebody to help them, they talk to friends, they listen to the radio, they go online, and you can find a number of different places that appear similar in nature, but frankly there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of different services that aren't exactly the same. Even if you were specifically looking for a trustee and you went online and you Googled something along the lines of Kitchener bankruptcy trustee, you'll have a variety of names that appear, including ours, but you'll find some other things that aren't even trustees. So people are, ultimately people are businesses and they're competing for your business, but it's important to understand who you're dealing with. Because I am licensed by the government, I face a lot of regulation and monitoring and basic direction from the government. I've said this already, I'll probably say it many times through the course of our conversation here today. My role, specifically from the government, I'm required to do a thorough assessment for somebody of all of their options, even if that doesn't mean using the services that I can provide. I can administer a proposal or a bankruptcy, but there's a handful of other options as well, and it's actually a very small percentage of the people who contact us who actually file a proposal or bankruptcy with us. It's less than 20%, and that says to me that most times we're able to point people in a different direction, even if it doesn't mean using our services. So the way that's different than other services is that other companies who might be competing for your attention, they don't have that same requirement to go through all of the options. And though not necessarily, I think what it does is it increases the risk that that person is trying to sell you a specific service because simply that's all that they can provide, right? They don't have that mandate, and they're governed simply, well, I shouldn't say governed, their sole mandate is try to have your service. So even though I do end up referring people to a variety of other services, the reality is that many people do need my service. So the other way that we're different is that only a trustee can administer a proceeding under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. Again, that means a bankruptcy or a proposal. Those are the ways to legally stop your creditors from coming after you. The other kinds of services, again, different forms of negotiation effectively, cooperation on the part of the people you owe money to, really is voluntary on their part. And if the time for negotiation has run out, you really should be, even if you were reluctant before, you should be talking to a trustee, because that's who can provide you legal protection under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act.
Now, you've made it clear your job is to, as a trustee, is to help find people the right answer to their specific problems. Now, you've said people are apprehensive to talk to you about these things. Why do all your advertisements include the words like trustee and bankruptcy if those words make people uneasy?
I really love that question, and in a way it would seem to be easy, right? If I wanted more people to talk to me and I'm trying to help them, it would be easy not to say, hey, I'm a bankruptcy trustee. But the simple answer to your question, Dave, is that I'm required to by law. It is a specific requirement within the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act that I always identify myself in advertisements as a bankruptcy trustee. So then the other unregulated services where they don't have the same requirement, it's interesting that they will almost use the requirement that I have against us. It's almost like they'll specifically try to perpetuate the fear and anxiety that people already have about talking to me. So their ads might say, well, I'm not a trustee, and you don't want to talk to a trustee because you can't trust a trustee. A trustee always works for the creditors. And it's one thing if somebody says those kinds of things and you consult with them and you pay a fee for their advice where it actually provides guidance and resolves the situation. But there's a particular practice that happens on a regular basis that quite frankly drives me a little bit crazy. What often happens is that people have these kinds of ads where they're perpetuating that kind of fear, and people go to them because they're reluctant to talk to me first. But then what happens is these places are advertising what they call government programs where they're able to cut your debts down by a huge margin. Really what they're referring to are bankruptcies and consumer proposals. And as I've said, those are things that only a bankruptcy trustee can provide. So what happens is you meet with this person, they charge you some kind of a consulting fee, and they arrange a meeting with the trustee. And ultimately, that person, if it makes sense, after I've met with them as well, they proceed to file a proposal or bankruptcy actually with me. So the part that drives me crazy is kind of like that bait and switch tactic where they perpetuate that fear, you pay that person a fee, but then ultimately you end up dealing with a trustee that they were supposed to be afraid of anyway. And frankly, if that person wasn't going to talk to me in the first place, I mean, maybe that's money well spent if ultimately it led to resolving the problem. But the part that really concerns me is that it's taking advantage of that person in a time, especially when they really have very little or no extra money to spend on any kind of other service.
Mm-hmm. My guest today on Ask the Expert from Hoy's Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy, we're talking with Ian Martin. If you'd like to get the ball rolling, you can call them at 310-PLAN or learn more online at hoys.com. That's HOYES.com. You can also call us. If you've got a question that you'd like to get answered right now, then phone in 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. More of Ask the Experts is coming up here on 570 News.
Your host, Dave Callender.
Thanks so much for joining us today. My guest from Hoy's Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy, Ian Martin, joins us. Again, we want to tell you can call 310-PLAN if you'd like to get someone on the phone right now. You can learn more as you listen to the show at hoys.com. That's HOYES.com. And I know not everyone wants to call in and talk about debt problems on the air, but if you really have a question that you need to get answered right now, we would be happy to talk to you at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. From your experience, Ian, what causes people to start to accumulate debt?
Well, I think you say that, and I first think of, I feel like it's important to just kind of point out the obvious and talk about the simple math of it. And by that I'm referring to kind of the imbalance that people have over time in terms of the money they have coming in on a regular monthly basis compared to their financial obligations. So when things are out of balance, when people have more obligations and money coming in, obviously they use things like credit cards and lines of credit to at least temporarily restore that balance. However, the issue, of course, is that at some point you need to deal with the debts. So in terms of the reasons that would cause that imbalance, the reality of North American life today is that things are expensive, right? Whether it's rent or mortgage, cell phones, cars, groceries, whatever. Things are very, very expensive, and many people live paycheck to paycheck. And maybe they're able to balance things out for the most part. But then, for a lot of people that I see, there's one or two major life changes that happen that cause things to be thrown wildly out of balance. Consider what would happen if you had some kind of significant injury at work or some kind of illness that kept you away from work, where even if you had disability, it's lower than your paycheck, or there's a period of time where no money's coming in. A big thing that I see is, frankly, the breakdown in marriages or relationships. And financially, from that end, there's oftentimes significant legal costs related to resolving the details of the separation. But then the other aspect is a little bit more simple and somewhat insidious. And I'm just referring to going from having two incomes to manage the household expenses to simply one income. And over time, people become more at risk of having to rely on credit to make up the shortfall, basically.
Mm-hmm. Once that starts to happen, once debt is beginning to accumulate, What stops people from getting out of debt?
Well, I guess it's unfortunately not all that hard to get into debt, as we were just talking about. Much more difficult to get out, and the real trap is the high interest things like high interest credit cards, where for many people they really, in hindsight, they're in too deep and unable to get out on their own before they even realize it. In terms of not taking action, there is an aspect of people being somewhat comfortable with having credit and debt, and that is part of our society where they're programmed to focus on the monthly payment, or they have deferred payment plans, or just the easy availability of things like credit cards and lines of credit, where at least in the short term it kind of hides or masks the issue that is underlying it. Other part is emotional. Things are very busy, it's chaotic. If people are feeling very frazzled and overwhelmed, it's normal that a sort of paralysis will set in, and there's not the real, I don't want to say motivation because I don't think that's the right word, but there's not the real impetus to really make a change until there's an external force that really forces them to change.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, what factors change? What happens that finally makes someone say, I'm going to call Hoy's Michalos?
Well, I guess everybody has a different breaking point. For a lot of people, it is something external. When you owe money to people and you're not able to pay them enough to keep them happy, a bank on a credit card, say, there is the risk that they will take legal action. And the end result of that after several weeks or several months is a risk of a wage garnishee. So it's very common that I sit down with somebody, and in hindsight, they know that something's been, that things haven't been good for some time, but a combination of ignoring it or even pride or embarrassment in talking about it, it's not real to them until there's a court order in their hand that says their next paycheck is going to be garnished. So that's a real external force that causes people to take action, where I can help them legally through a bankruptcy rate proposal stop that action. And sometimes it's really hard to put a finger on it. Sometimes there's a friend or a family member that's encouraging people to talk to me. This time of year in mid-January, a lot of people with New Year's resolutions combine that with the credit card bills coming in, where there's kind of that final little push to talk to somebody about dealing with it. I find that some people, by the time they talk to me, have done a lot of research and they're ready to act. And other people, they're still, even though they've made that first step to talk to me, they're still feeling very overwhelmed and they're just not in a position to make a decision. Even so, it's possible that I could talk to somebody and it appears that they're ready to make a decision, but they're just emotionally just not quite ready. And maybe they go for away a little bit and they come back and see me 6 months later or a year later sometimes, even longer sometimes, and they say, you know what, I know the conversation we had however long ago, it was a good conversation. I just needed time. I just needed time to know it was the right choice for me. And sometimes they express regret that they hadn't made that step sooner. And I don't really see that as lost time the way they seem to be saying it. It was just, as I said before, they had their own breaking point and they just needed to be satisfied that it was the right choice for them.
I've heard your ads, obviously, because I work here at a radio station.
We do advertise on your station, David.
Yes. So I've heard your ads, and some of your ads you say debt-free in 30. What does that actually mean?
Well, I think the best way to explain that is just to walk through a little bit about what happens when somebody sits down with me for a consultation. At that point, when I'm sitting down with somebody face-to-face, I've probably spoken with them, either me or another trustee has spoken with them for perhaps 5 minutes or a little bit more on the phone, just to get a bit of a preliminary outline of the situation, to make sure that it makes sense to sit down. Sometimes there's a simple exchange of emails, but most times I have a bit of an outline, at least, about what the situation is. So at that point, we proceed to have a little bit of a Q&A, right? I need to ask some questions to confirm my understanding of the details about things like who do they owe money to, what kind of amounts, what kind of stuff do they own, is there a house, are there investments, is there a car, what kind of income do they expect to have? And that's helping me understand the real issue. But then from there, once I've confirmed that understanding, I'm able to walk them through the different options that are available to them. And really, in terms of the options, there are a handful of different options. Ideally, we're trying to find a way for somebody to pay their debts in full. Most times, by the time they're sitting down with me, that's simply not realistic. And we're just trying to educate so that person can make the best choice. And though it sounds simple, even if there isn't a final decision made and we don't expect you to make a decision within 30 minutes, most times that discussion face-to-face can be as short as 30 minutes. And at that point, if it appears that the right answer is to file a bankruptcy or a proposal with my office, we'll then proceed in more detail about, confirming the kinds of documents to basically verify all the details about what we've just talked about. But oftentimes it's as simple as 30 minutes to see that, there is a path, right? To have a path, to have insight in terms of what way makes the most sense for them.
You've used the word options an awful lot today.
I use that word a lot, Dave. Many times each and every day in my life.
So when we come back from break, we are going to have to take a short break. I'm going to grill you about that. I'm going to ask
Excellent.
you.
Bring it on, Dave. Bring it on.
What the options are. Well, let's talk a little bit about credit rating. You always hear people going, "Oh, I don't want to file bankruptcy because it would ruin my credit rating." We'll talk about that as well when we come back in a few minutes. My guest is Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos, trustees in bankruptcy. Online at hoyes.com, HOYES.com, and also you can give them a call at 310-PLAN. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. News is next here on 570 News.
570 News returns to Ask the Experts. Here's Dave Callender.
With me on the show today from Hoyes Michalos, trustees in bankruptcy, we welcome Ian Martin, who's here to talk to us about all of the different options that you have when dealing with debt. If you want to get the ball rolling right now, though, you can call Hoyes Michalos at 310-PLAN, or you'll find them online at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Your other option, of course, is to give us a call right now here in the studio with your questions at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715, or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. So, yes, the word options has been bandied about a little bit today.
I mentioned it once or twice, yes.
Yeah, what are the options for dealing with debt?
Well, the way I break it down for people, first of all, is to break it into two general categories. Number one is the options where you're paying the full amount of the debts back. And number two, to point out the obvious, is where you're not being able to pay back the full amount of the debts. So to briefly touch on area one, there's only certain limited ways to do it. You might be able to obtain a consolidation loan from the bank to pay the debts in full. Perhaps look for ways to change the budget a little bit, maybe supplement the income, maybe find ways to reduce the expenses. Sometimes people are in a position to sell certain assets, maybe investments, maybe a second vehicle. Maybe that's a way to pay the debts in full. By the time I see people, usually those options have been explored on their own and it's not realistic. So then, but once I've confirmed that understanding, I then focus on kind of more the compromises. As I've said before, the options that I can legally administer that are restricted to a trustee are a proposal, a consumer proposal under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and bankruptcy. We can talk about those in a little bit more detail. The other one that sometimes is a good option for people is referred to as credit counseling or a debt management plan. There's an agency in town. They've changed their name once or twice. I'll try to get this right. They used to be called Mosaic Counseling and Family Services. They recently changed to Horizon, I believe it is. They're located on Queen Street here in Kitchener. The idea behind their arrangements is to effectively stop the high interest rates. It's very much effective, geared towards high interest debts like credit cards, where the person is committing to repaying the full amount of the debt, but with little or no interest going forward, and then over a payment period of 4 or 5 years. And the people at Horizon can help step in and facilitate that kind of agreement.
Now, credit rating is another thing we hear a lot, and we've certainly talked about people who say they haven't come to see you because they were afraid it would damage their credit rating. How does credit rating actually fit into all of this?
Well, you're bang on, Dave, in that most people express a lot of anxiety about going down a path where it will hurt their credit rating. And that's why my first focus is on going through the options. Again, as I said just a moment ago, I first look to say, is there at least the possibility, is there a chance that this person will be able to pay their debts in full? And the reason for that, if possible, is that by paying their debts in full, there's not going to be any kind of negative notation on the credit rating. So that's why we go down that road. And oftentimes I will go through those strategies with somebody, even if the purpose is to illustrate why it isn't realistic to pay back their debts in full. And that way just to kind of help them process the information and realize why that isn't realistic. So then the other options, whether it's a bankruptcy or a proposal or a debt management arrangement through Horizon Counseling, because the full amount of the debt isn't being paid back, unfortunately there is a negative notation on the credit rating for, frankly, a fairly long period of time. But I think it's important to really consider what a credit rating or a credit report is about. It's a tool, right? It's a tool that a bank will use down the road to assess the risk of somebody being able to repay the debt that they're applying for. So really it's a tool to obtain further credit down the road. So when somebody says to me they don't want to do something that's going to hurt their credit rating because they've maintained their payments, I talk to them about, well, if you were to go out today and if you were to apply for a car loan or a mortgage, would you get approved for that? And oftentimes, even if somebody's been able to maintain their minimum payments, the answer is still no, because a bank is unwilling to add more debt onto the pile. So if somebody's still hesitant, then and they're hesitant to go forward with something like a bankruptcy rate proposal, then I suggest that they do talk to the bank. And that way, they've explored all opportunities. And if it does turn out that the bank can help them, great. If not, then they're confident they've explored all the options.
Now, if someone comes to you, as we've just discussed, and they say, I really do want to pay my debts back in full, how does someone actually do that?
Well, let's go back over that in a little bit more detail. It has to be the right kind of circumstances. Sometimes people ask me that question like they think I have like a secret, playbook that only certain people have access to. If there is that book, I'm not one of them, right? I haven't been given that privilege, but I'll share with you what I know. Sometimes people are able to borrow money from the bank to consolidate the debts. The idea behind that is to replace bad debt with, I'll say, better debt or good debt. You turn a high interest debt into lower interest debt. The issue there is that most times the bank in lending further money, they want to see that there's some kind of asset that they can have as protection or collateral, and that would be a house with equity. So even if there's some equity in the house, the bank is restricted to lending you 80% of the value. So they have to have kind of like the right forces, like the stars have to align for there to be the right set of circumstances where the bank will lend you enough money to consolidate high-interest credit cards into a low-interest second mortgage or a low-interest secured line of credit. The other way would be to perhaps sell assets. Perhaps you have some RSPs that you could take out. The risk there is that you have to pay tax on it, and investment advisors will always say, no, don't touch your RSPs. That's for retirement. But my retort to that is, well, if that is actually an answer to deal with all of your debts, why don't you do that? Right? Because if you deal with the high interest debts, it's possible to basically replenish those investments through the monthly payments that you were previously just throwing away on interest towards the credit cards. And then the final way would be to make changes to the budget. Ways to supplement your income would be to maybe get a second job, maybe rent out a room or the basement. A lot of people aren't really comfortable with that, but that is on paper an option. The other way would be to find ways to reduce expenses. There's obviously limits in terms of your flexibility that way. I said before that a lot of these ideas are really common sense. And I don't say that in a sort of condescending way where I think people are foolish for asking the question. It's really, sometimes people really need to hear that kind of confirmation from a professional about what these things really mean and whether they truly are realistic for them. And as I've said before, they want to be satisfied that they've explored all those options before they go down a road where they might be having some kind of negative impact on their credit rating.
What about consolidation loans? When is a consolidation loan the right choice?
Well, I think that we were touching on that a moment ago, but I think the best way to illustrate it is through a numeric example. And I guess even before that, the general idea would be that if you can get approved on it, if the stars do align for you, then it is a good answer because you're paying back all the debts. But again, a simple numeric example. Understanding that the bank in lending any kind of significant money on a loan is going to look for assets as security. So let's say you have a house with a value of roughly $300,000 that the bank is comfortable with that assessment. And in the meantime, you have, say, $25,000 or $30,000 of high-interest credit cards that you've managed to make the payments on. Numerically, that would probably be something like $700 or $800 a month, each and every month, just for the interest on those credit cards. But you're not going anywhere. So you talk to the bank, and they look at it, and your current mortgage balance is, say, $200,000. So there's equity there. But the bank isn't able, legally, they're not allowed to lend to you the full amount there. They can't lend you $100,000. By that, I'm referring to the difference between the value of $300 and the mortgage at $200. They can lend you 80% of the value. So 80% of $300,000, simple math, $240,000. So in this example, they can lend you $240, the mortgage is already at $200, and the person has $25,000 in high interest debt. If that person has stable income, the bank most likely would approve them on a consolidation loan, and that would be either a consolidation loan or a second mortgage, perhaps a new mortgage, a secured line of credit. And it takes the interest from, say, 18 to 24% down to probably less than 5%. And instead of paying $700 or $800 a month just towards interest on credit cards, the payment is going to be far less per month, and there's actually an end in sight.
Now, I'm not going to ask you the next question. You told me during the break that your kids are always asking you this question. What are they always asking you at home?
Oh, so you want me to say it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the question is, well, what exactly is bankruptcy, right? And so I'll play two sides here. Ian, what is bankruptcy? And I will answer my question. Really, it's a legal process by which a person is released or discharged from his obligation to repay his debts. There are some exceptions to that idea, the idea of being discharged from your debts. So, for example, there are certain ones, things like child support or student loans in some situations, and debts that are incurred fraudulently, that those can't be removed by bankruptcy. The other one is secured items like a mortgage or a car loan. If you file a bankruptcy, if you want to keep your house, you have to keep paying for the house. That loan isn't going to go away, the mortgage that is. So one of the basic concepts underlying the system is really about giving the honest but unfortunate debtor a fresh start from his debts when he's simply insolvent and cannot pay his debts, but he hasn't contributed to his financial difficulties significantly by doing foolish, rash, hazardous things. I view the bankruptcy process as really 3 stages. And that's going beyond the initial assessment phase. When somebody's decided that bankruptcy is the right answer, there's the initial filing process where I've prepared a bunch of paperwork that outlines their situation, and I file that on behalf of the person with the federal government. It's at that point that they are legally protected under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, where people can't continue to take legal action against them. The middle part, kind of the meat of the sandwich, is the administration of the bankruptcy. And then the final part is the discharge process. Once that's at the conclusion of the person's bankruptcy, they're discharged from bankruptcy. It's at that point that they're released from their obligations for the most part. The middle part, then, the administration, there's a variety of duties that people have to complete a bankruptcy. So that includes attending with the trustee for 2 counseling sessions that are intended to provide them with information and advice about going forward. Pardon me. They're required to provide me with a monthly report that summarizes their income and their expenses. There's certain payments that are required by law, and then also if there's assets that are not protected by law, they're required to assist me in terms of realizing them.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, though, we'll talk about some of the benefits of bankruptcy, and of course we'll also touch on what a proposal is. If you've got questions right now, though, you can call us. Our lines are open at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. If you'd like to get in touch with Hoyes Michalos, call them at 310-PLAN or get more information online at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Ask the Experts returns in just a couple of minutes here on 570 News.
We're listening to 570 News. Time for more of Ask the Experts with your host, Dave Callender.
Thanks so much for joining us on Ask the Experts today. I should mention again that if you would like to see how incredibly beautiful we are, you can go online to 570news.com. We are doing a video podcast of the show today, and you can watch it there. My guest is Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos, Trustees in Bankruptcy, online at hoyes.com, and you can call them at 310-PLAN. Before the break, we were talking about what a bankruptcy is. What are the benefits of bankruptcy?
But before I address that specific question, I think it's important to really highlight that, again, I don't advocate bankruptcy. I don't think there are obviously benefits, but it's really the last resort, right? So having said that, there are very clear financial benefits. It provides you legal protection from your creditors where they can't sue you to garnish you a paycheck or seize assets from you. And really, you're not required to repay the full amount of the debt. So obviously that is a tremendous financial benefit. There are certain trade-offs, but even before talking about the trade-offs, there's lots of non-financial benefits as well. Just consider if you're stressed out, like you're stressed out like crazy, you can't open the mail, you don't want to answer the phone, the debts are taken care of. You know, you have peace of mind, you feel that you can open the mail again, you can answer the phone, and through that relief of the stress, maybe you're able to focus more on moving forward, focus on the future. It's very hard for people to plan for the future and start making goals when they're feeling so frazzled and paralyzed by trying to deal with the debt. So, maybe you're able to start saving money for a down payment for a house, or, perhaps save up for education, whether it's for yourself or your kids. It may be as simple as going on a vacation when you feel like you haven't been able to do something like that in many, many years. So I think those are very clear benefits.
And what about the costs involved with bankruptcy? Can you outline those?
Yeah, I'll try to go through those a little bit. And that's really the trade-off. The benefit is that you're released from the obligation to repay the debts, but for some people it comes at a cost. Sometimes it's significant, sometimes it's not significant. It really depends on that person's situation. So the financial end of it is a function of both a person's assets or possessions, and then also their income level. With the assets, this is where I tend to use some jargon or technical speak, so I apologize if I get into too much detail. But effectively, by law, people's assets are either exempt from seizure, meaning protected by law, or they're not. If they're not protected by law, then it puts me in the position where I have to recover that money for the person's creditors. It's not going to be enough to pay those guys back in full. They get a small part of what they owe. And when I say the word realize, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to actually take something from somebody. That actually doesn't happen very often. But if it was, say, if there's, say, like a $2,000 investment that somebody wanted to keep, if they agree to pay me $2,000, then they can keep that investment because it puts the creditors in the same position. A couple specific notes on particular assets that are the commonly asked ones. With the house, there is no particular law that protects a house. It really becomes a question of equity. If there was, say, a relatively small amount, like $5,000, normally what we would do is come up with a payment arrangement so the person pays for the equity. But if it's a larger amount, or if they fail to make the payments that we agreed to, it puts me in the position where at some point I need to basically take the house and sell it, and that's money for the creditors. Lots of questions about cars as well. If somebody has a loan against their car, there wouldn't be, it's unlikely that there would be equity in it like there might be in a house. So if there's a loan against it, they just keep making the payments, there's no issue. If there's no loan against it, it really becomes a question of value. In Ontario, a vehicle is exempt up to $5,650. So if it's below that, there's clearly no issue. Sometimes I see people where it's just a little bit above. So let's say the value of your vehicle was $500 above that magic number of $5,650. Well, in that situation, I don't take the person's car. That doesn't make sense. They just agree to pay $500 to the bankruptcy, and they're able to keep their vehicle. So that was a little bit about assets. The other part is about income, and really the idea with income, there's a concept called surplus income, and the general idea is to balance out the individual's right to a fresh start with the rights of the creditors to be treated fairly. So what happens is people who make too much money pay more into bankruptcy. And it's not what I consider to be too much or what the person considers to be too much income. It's a formula that is set by the government. They come up with numbers every year that are based on the size of the family. So I'll give you a simple numeric example. A family of one is allowed to make roughly $2,000 a month. For somebody who, on a net basis, this is after deductions, if they're making $2,800 a month, the government perceives that to be $800 of surplus income, so $800 over the limit of $2,000. So in a bankruptcy, that person is required to pay half of their surplus amount, or in this scenario, $400 a month for each month of bankruptcy.
Let's move on to consumer proposals.
Absolutely.
It almost seems, from what you're saying, because bankruptcy is the last ditch effort.
Yep.
A proposal is preferred. Let's talk about whether that's true and what a proposal actually is.
Right. So, well, really, a consumer, if a bankruptcy is the last resort, realistically, a consumer proposal is the second to last resort. It accomplishes a lot of the same things as bankruptcy. It provides the same legal protection from the people you owe money to, but without going through bankruptcy, basically. So, legally, what it is, it's a form of settlement. It's a form of legal debt settlement governed by the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, where your creditors agree to basically allow you to not repay the full amount of the debt. So the reasons why people would favor that would be if bankruptcy was costly for them. And if bankruptcy meant they might lose assets or pay a lot of surplus income, a proposal might be a more attractive option for them. And lots of times people will say to me, well, why in the world would a creditor agree to that? Why would they agree to let somebody off without the full amount? Well, they see it the same way that I see it. They can go through the numbers as well. They can see, well, if this person were to file a bankruptcy, here's how much money would be distributed to the creditors based on the different laws and regulations. So a proposal is always designed to repay more compared to what they would get through bankruptcy. Right? But that way, that's why they normally agree to it. If from a financial end, if the bank see they're getting more money, most times they'll make a smart business decision and agree to that proposal if they think it's realistic for you and if they think they're being treated fairly.
Mm-hmm. The flip side of that is, though, that the debtor should look at that and go, wait a second, I'm going to pay more if I do this than I would in a bankruptcy.
Oh, I see where you're going, yeah.
Yeah, so why would I choose the proposal over the bankruptcy?
Yeah, I'll add on to your question as well. Right? I said before that really a proposal or a bankruptcy accomplishes the same thing, right? So right, why would you choose to do a proposal? Well, there's oftentimes financial and non-financial reasons. So in a bankruptcy, sometimes you're not able to keep all of your possessions. Sometimes there's a large surplus income penalty. Sometimes filing a bankruptcy means you can't keep your job. If you have an accounting designation like I do and you file a bankruptcy, well, that's not going to be good. If you work in a bank and you handle cash, you need to be bonded. Well, that's not good if you file a bankruptcy. Sometimes people need to renew things like real estate licenses or licenses for selling vehicles. In a bankruptcy, you're not able to do so. So there could be real reasons why filing a proposal makes a lot more sense. But then also, a lot of people, there's emotional reasons. And even though either one of these options is an indication that financial things haven't worked out the way that you intended, a lot of people continue to have a bigger emotional stigma with bankruptcy. And the idea of not filing a bankruptcy by being more proactive and voluntarily offering to repay as much of the debt as they believe is possible based on their budget, it makes them feel better, basically.
Maybe you could outline for us a typical situation, a scenario for a consumer proposal.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to illustrate it. So here's a very common scenario that I see. Let's say there's a married couple, 2 or 3 kids at home, and the reason that they have debts is that perhaps one or both of them have been laid off in the last few years or some kind of reduction of income. And as a result of that, some debts have accumulated. Perhaps there's something like $40,000 or $50,000 between credit cards and lines of credit that have accumulated. At this point in time, there is the appearance of some kind of stability where both parents are working. There's some kind of money coming in. They've been able to pay all the bills on a monthly basis. They've made all the minimum payments towards the debts, but they're not going anywhere. So then I sit down and I ask the questions about the debts and the income, the assets. Maybe there's a house with a little bit of equity, maybe say $5,000 or $10,000. So there's equity there, but not enough where they could go back to the bank to borrow against it in a consolidation loan to pay off that $40,000 of high interest debt. Right? In a bankruptcy, they would have to either pay the trustee for the equity, the $5,000 or $10,000, or risk losing the house. And also, they're in a position where they would probably have a surplus income penalty. They don't feel like they have surplus because they have no money left over. But remember, that's a formula based on government standards that look at income, not at expenses. So for that family, a proposal typically would be a lot more manageable. On something like $50,000 of debt with a little bit of equity in the house and maybe a little bit of surplus income that would be paid in bankruptcy, their creditors would probably agree to an arrangement that would pay roughly a third of it, something like $15,000 to $18,000. It could be set up as a monthly payment. The maximum period is 5 years, 60 months, but that would be something in the range of $250 a month to $300 a month over 5 years. The creditors would most likely agree to that because they see they're getting treated fairly compared to what they would get through bankruptcy, and that's much more manageable for that family compared to even what bankruptcy would cost.
With less than a minute left in the show, what would you like to say to folks to wrap up today if they're experiencing debt problems?
Well, if you look at your situation and you don't feel that you're going in the direction that you want to be, if the status quo simply isn't working, you need to make a change. And I'm not naive. I appreciate that it's difficult to talk to anybody. It's difficult to talk to me as a stranger and as a trustee about your situation. But if you're not going in the direction you want, you really need to have a plan to deal with the situation. Right? So the first step is picking up the phone or sending an email and talking to somebody about the pros and cons of your different options.
Thank you so much for being on the show today again, Ian.
Thank you, Dave.
My guest, Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy. 310-PLAN is the number to call, or learn more online at hoyes.com, HOYES.com. News is next. More of Ask Experts coming up on 570 News.